All right, here is an example of a homework problem you will see on your exponential growth and decay homework. So it gives us a graph of an exponential, and it wants us to figure out if we have growth or decay, and then we want to figure out the initial value, the factor, and the rate. So if we have an exponential growth, we would be figuring out the growth factor and the growth rate. If we have an exponential decay, we would be figuring out the decay factor and the decay rate. So the first thing we're going to do is figure out if we have a growth or decay. Well, if we look at what's happening to y as x increases, so does y, which means we have a growth. This graph is increasing. Okay, now we need to figure out the equation of this graph. So remember, our exponential equation is y equals a times b to the x. So when we have this equation, our a is always the initial value. As you learned in your notes today, the b is our growth factor. Since we have a growth, we have a growth factor. Okay, and also in your notes, you should have that when we have a growth factor, b equals 1 plus r, where r is the growth rate. So by figuring out the equation of this exponential, we can answer all of the questions that it's asking. So let's start by finding a. Hopefully you remember that a is our y-intercept. So if we look at our graph, we can see where it's crossing the y-axis. It's crossing at 0, 3. So this y value of the y-intercept tells us the a value. Now, what else we need to figure out is the b. So we talked about this briefly in class on Friday, but if we want to find b, our growth factor, we need to find points that have consecutive x values. So for example, 0 and 1. These are consecutive x values, so we're going to find the points. We already found 0, 3, and then we have 1, 6. So these points have consecutive x values. They're right next to each other. We're going to look at the y values now. So our b is going to be equal to that second y value of 6 over the first y value, which is 3. So b equals 2. So our equation is going to be y equals 3, 2 to the x. Sometimes in this homework you'll just be asked to find the equation, but this actually asks us for more. So the initial value, we see that a is 3. Our factor here is just our b, written as a decimal. We aren't going to change anything. So we have b is 2. Now we want the rate written as a percent. So we can see rate in our equation here. And we also already know what b is. So we can substitute b in. b is 2 equals 1 plus r. Subtract 1 to find r. And we get 1. Okay, remember 1 written as a decimal can be 1.00. So if we want to find that as a percent, we're going to move over 2 decimal places, and we have 100%. Sorry, I don't know why that keeps doing that. So you would just write 100 there since the percent is already in the question for you. So whenever you are wanting to find all of this information, make sure you first find if it's a growth or decay, since a decay factor has a different equation. Okay, ask your teacher if you have any questions.